Hello, I'm Hannah Fry. Welcome to PwC's Human-Led Tech-Powered series. In this episode, I'm joined by a fantastic panel of experts to discuss the balancing act that's required as businesses look to deliver on commitments to both purpose and profitability. Is such a thing even possible? Where are the trade-offs? What skills and technologies are needed? And where do they begin? Let's find out.
I know that in recent years we've seen a big move towards businesses acting on climate change and sustainability. How much of that difference do you think comes from the moral imperative to do so, and how much of it comes from the business case?
I think it's both. But if I pick up on the business imperative first, clients I'm working with are certainly seeing it as a way to access new sources of funds, get lower cost of capital, so demonstrate that they're serious about the commitments they're making and then taking action. Moral imperative is there too, right? I think I'd like to hope for all of us inherently, we want to do the right thing. But at times there are barriers, there are challenges that get in the way and stop us from taking action.
Morality and morals is a very difficult word, but values is a word I think the business community is much more comfortable with. So what are the values? What do you stand for? How do you want to make the world a better place? Why do you exist? Is much more common parlance today than it was even 20 years ago. And then, of course, there is a business case, because if you don't act, regulation is going to punish you significantly in a whole host of areas.
We recently did a report which showed that only 64% of UK businesses have got an environmental sustainability strategy embedded into their overall business strategy.
Wow.
And when we looked at then those who are going to hit their targets for 2050, actually less than half are on track to do that. So when we talk about, ambition and moving to action, there's a huge imperative, I think, for businesses to be able to really get going and lead the way on how to do things in a different way.
So that's interesting then, that 2/3 roughly of businesses want to have this thing, have these targets, but actually, across the board, only 1/3 are actually managing to achieve it, give or take.
There's a couple of reasons why I think that is. The first is there's a data challenge. When organisations are asked to track and manage and report on what they're doing across all of their scopes, across all of the business in terms of the emissions and the impact that they're having, that's really difficult. The majority of emissions happen for a business within their scope 3, so within the entire value chain of an organisation, up to 97% in lots of cases. There's also a big skills gap, I think, across organisations to be able to ensure that we do keep on track and have those skills to look at change management and circular thinking and systems thinking, digital skills. And
are you seeing that sense of urgency appearing at board meetings around the table?
Yeah, there was a survey, 1% of investor meetings used to have an ESG element. Now 20% of investor meetings have an ESG element. So not only is it an important issue within the boardroom, but actually 60% of the value of our company is owned by ESG compliant stocks. Most business leaders realize you can't have a healthy business community on an unhealthy planet. It is unsustainable, it is not going to work. Therefore, we have to make our contribution in what we do in a material way, not in an immaterial way. What can you do as a business that makes a significant contribution to some of the major challenges, small and large, that we face? 2.9 billion people are still unconnected, despite the fact that 2.5 billion of those people have access to mobile internet. Women are twice as likely not to have access to mobile in some of the markets in which we're operating as men. We could look at, and obviously we talked to our employees and engaged with everybody and began a conversation around some of these issues, and not getting any pushback. On the contrary, getting a huge engagement, a huge interest.
There is presumably a line, though, here, where you can't ignore the balance sheet altogether, of course, and just only be guided by the right thing for the planet. It has to be some kind of a balance.
I think anyone who talks win-win has never worked in this space in a serious way in a large company. Okay, there are trade-offs. The talk of win-win is just an oversimplification of these incredibly complex issues. There is a line somewhere between short and long, and that line is different for different businesses, and it's different for different businesses in the cycle of their life. And I think the commitment is revealed through data. I think, actually, back to your point, the quality of that data, so that the chief financial officer of the company can stand up and can report on the non-financial data with the credibility and the accuracy that PwC would like of their normal financial data, that is proof that the company is taking this issue seriously.
Do you buy that, or are there win-wins to be had? Is there cause for optimism?
There is absolutely cause for optimism, and I'm not oversimplifying. There is no one silver bullet to fix all of this. The system change that we as a globe need to go through. However, I think when I try to find optimism, in the midst of all of the data which is showing us that unless we rapidly accelerate on the action, it doesn't look so bright in the future for us. It is around the fact that actually we haven't found all the solutions yet. There are brilliant ideas sitting in people's heads that haven't yet been realised, and the role of innovation to extract those, and where technology can then help drive and realise those is where I find hope, actually, because there's lots of those technologies. We look at the carbon capture and storage, for example, that are still quite nascent industries and need that support to be able to ensure that it's there for everybody to take advantage of. We've been innovating as a human race forever around problems, and I'm absolutely convinced that we can do the same here with the climate change.
I can't help but feel if there are these opportunities to do things in a more efficient way, if people like it, if there's a good business case for it, why hasn't it happened already?
There's 2 points. First is coming back to that piece around the balance around cost versus benefit and the short to medium to longer term view. The second for me, though, is the data, it's getting better, but actually the environment within which to report, the regulation, what you actually have to report, that's not there yet. So whilst we can be working towards the technological solutions for the data and where it exists in your organisation, there is still not that consistency of, well, what are the metrics? What's the methodology behind those? We can end up with all of the data in the world, but actually, well, what is it that we're going to be regulated against? So I think that regulatory drive is what's also pushing organisations. But I really don't want it to be, action being taken just because of compliance and compliance sake.
This is wholesale behaviour change that we're asking everybody to do, wherever they sit, be that within a business, at home. We are asking people to be working in a different way, to be thinking in a different way, to be, looking at every decision that they make.
And I wonder, actually, do you think that the economic crisis that we find ourselves in has changed the motivation to act in this way?
Without a doubt, it's having an impact. I think it's different depending on the kind of segments you work in, organisations are in, or the size of your business. The different stakeholders of a business want to understand what those values are. I think we certainly see with some of our clients, whether it's in retail and consumer, right? Actually, consumers making choices now much more looking at the values of the organisation, how they are treating workers in their supply chain or in that environmental performance. So actually, without taking action now, you're going to lose actually out on your market presence that you've currently got in terms of that captive audience. But it is a fine balance because there is also a cost pressure in terms of investments needed to be made to decarbonise or to do the other things in your programme.
Do you think that it makes it harder to invest in these kind of things when it is harder to make profit?
Of course, there are huge competing priorities for organisations at the moment. As we go through the current economic crisis, there are some organisations who are worried about just keeping the lights on, let alone, where are they going to go with the sustainability agenda. Trying to ensure that sustainability is still kept at the heart of the business is imperative because hopefully we'll steer through the economic crisis and we'll still have the climate challenge that we need to look at. And I think that's where the role of sustainability really needs to be at the board level. It needs to be represented as part of decision-making, plugged into the finance from a profit and loss perspective on a more long-term basis around where investments need to be made for the benefit of the business in the future.
Absolutely. I wonder about practical steps that different organisations can take here. It's all very well having these as sort of big ambitions, as the big banner of this is what we're aiming for. But practically, what does that look like when you're actually trying to implement this?
One of the first ones is to start and not to worry too much about having a perfect plan to get going. The problem that we see here is that there are so many different elements to be considering, but not waiting to have this perfect plan, I think, is key. Just start.
A number of the clients I'm working with, actually, they're starting to link their kind of executive pay, remuneration packages back to their performance in relation to ESG targets. Now, that certainly drives focus when you do that. It can also be a little bit of a dangerous place for some organisations at the moment, coming back to the kind of data challenge that exists. One of my clients who had linked their executive pay had an audit done of some of the data that sat underneath those metrics. Out of kind of 40 metrics, the opinion had to be qualified for almost half of those, which meant, in essence, we're not giving you an opinion for those, and actually it's bad. One metric in relation to inclusion and diversity, unfortunately, uncovered that actually they didn't even have a process, let alone a system, to support the metrics that they were reporting.
But then I guess that is sort of a kind of an unavoidable problem with metrics in a way, which is that once you have them, there is going to be some sort of way to game them.
Not if they're managed by the right people. So if they're managed by the financial community, you don't game your finance numbers unless you're very unwise. I mean, you know, that you go to jail for that.
Yes.
If you have people and processes and frameworks that for years have delivered those financial numbers, and you have an internal audit function that reviews those numbers along with the external auditors, if you build in your non-financials, including your diversity scorecard, into that, then you've got a much better chance of having credible numbers.
So I guess in sort of a short summary, it's that people need to take these numbers much more seriously, need to treat them in the same way that they do financial numbers, but then also need to make them matter by linking them to things like executive pay.
Absolutely, and there are other things that can be done as well. So, for example, at Microsoft, we have something called an internal carbon fee. So that is keeping each of our business units accountable for the decision that they're making and the impact that those decisions are having from an overall sustainability perspective. So we can absolutely link, where that comes back to in terms of the fee that they then need to pay for the carbon output that they've got, and we can use that fee to go and reinvest within the business for efficiencies that we want to drive. We'll go and look at where we can invest around innovation for some of these nascent technologies that really the world need to be seeing.
The way that you're all describing this, I feel slightly more optimistic that these issues are being taken seriously and that industry as a whole is trying to find the right metrics in order to really have these things at the forefront of their planning going forward.
You know, business is now part of the solution rather than part of the problem, and that's a massive change. I think the investor community is looking very carefully and investing in a way that they believe represents purpose. There's a lot of work to be done in that. But I think what's exciting is at the highest level of business community, these issues are being discussed and debated and looked at, and we have a generation of younger people coming through into the employee base who want these issues resolved, and I'm really optimistic because of that.
I am also really optimistic. I think, building on those points, we've got amazing skills, whether it's engineers, data scientists, who we need, right, to help us to work out how to solve these problems. And then the advances that we've seen in technology, just in the last few years, are just going to help accelerate that for us, which is what we need to solve the problems.
Do you find that companies, given the sort of the backdrop of all of this, do you find that companies are shouting from the rooftops with every change that they're making?
Well, this is quite an interesting one. I have quite a few conversations now, actually, with organisations. They're really nervous, actually, almost to say anything. So we talk a lot about greenwashing, quite rightly so. I don't know if you've heard of the term now, green hushing. Quite a few companies actually, they think we're doing well here, but they're holding back a bit from actually feeling like they can kind of say something in public because they're so nervous about being accused of greenwashing.
Which sort of seems a bit of a shame, because I kind of think that the more that people talk about this stuff, the more likely it is that more will be done.
I think there is something in that, isn't there, around you and the competitive spirit. I think, in terms of being able to whether to look across your peers as an organisation or to others, well, both to learn from each other as well, right? But also that competition is something that I think could be used as a force for good.
Yeah.
And I think in this space, doing good isn't good enough. You've got to prove that you're doing good. for companies, do it first and talk about it later, and have the data to substantiate everything you are publicly claiming. Absolutely key.
It sounds like we've got work to do. Quite a lot of work to do. Well, thank you so much for joining me. That was a fascinating discussion. You can catch up with the other episodes of Human-Led Tech Powered that are all available online. Thank you very much.